Cal Myers comes home early to a nightmare. His wife, Allie, in bed with Lindsay and Ronnie. But the real shock? They're setting her up for Judge Richard Marshall's twisted desires. Armed with a video camera, Cal captures the betrayal, igniting a fierce battle that uncovers a secret room of horrors. Betrayal has never been this deadly. I was not happy when I found out who would be handling my divorce case. Richard Marshall was a decent man and a good lawyer, known for being fair, but he was too close to my situation to be impartial. He needed to step back from this case. It was time for the first hearing. We were all getting settled. My lawyer, Bill Blevins, quickly asked for Judge Marshall to step aside. Richard said no, and the hearing continued. My wife's lawyer, Nathan Bloodstone, lived up to his tough reputation. He constantly called me rude names and said I had thrown Allie out on the street over a small argument. He claimed I was the bad guy who kept Allie from seeing our wonderful kids, Jason and Becca, who were 12 and 10 years old. He also said I had cut her off from our money and should be blamed for her troubles. My lawyer kept pushing back against everything Mr. Bloodstone said. He reminded everyone that it wasn't just a small fight. I had found Allie with 2 other people and I hadn't hurt anyone. In fact, I had left the room to let them get dressed. Allie had chosen to leave on her own. While this was happening, I tried hard not to jump up and shout. Instead, I thought about happier times. Ali and I met in college. It wasn't love at first sight. The first time I saw her, I only saw her back. At that time, her hair was short, and she looked a bit like a young boy from behind, standing at about 5'6". I know that's average for a woman, but I honestly thought she was a young man. When I finally got to see her face, she still looked a bit boyish at first. However, she was very attractive. Her features started to make it clear she was all woman, especially since she had no facial hair and a sweet voice. Her hands were nice, too, as we were both in line to sign up for classes. We didn't talk at that time. The next day, we were both late to the same class and there was only one empty seat. We both wanted it. I realized for sure she was a woman when she gave me a little bump with her hip before taking the seat. Her big smile lit up her face as she thanked me for letting her sit down. What could I do? I smiled back and moved to stand with some other late arrivals at the back of the room. The professor later moved some of us to his morning class, so I didn't see Allie for a while. By the way, my name is Calvin Myers, but friends call me Cal. I'm not a star athlete or a handsome leading man. I'm an average guy, about 6 feet tall, with brown hair and brown eyes. Anyway, let me get back to my story. A few weeks later, we both showed up at a party and we started talking. I made a big mistake by saying I had thought she was a boy. She got really mad and said some harsh things about people who jump to conclusions. I guess she was tired of folks thinking she was a boy just because of how she looked. She didn't dislike her appearance at all, but she was fed up with others' opinions. I listened to her sharp remarks for a bit before I gently placed my finger on her lips and asked if she would go out for dinner with me so I could really apologize. She looked surprised when I did that. After a moment, she nodded. I asked her when she wanted to go. Allie smiled and kissed my finger, saying, "Right now would be perfect. Let's go to Denny's." So off we went. We had a great time learning more about each other. We found out we were both studying business administration and came from similar-sized towns. They weren't far apart, so we decided we'd share rides during holidays. We became good friends. I truly mean that. When I was studying and needed a break, I could call Allie. She would meet me somewhere, and we'd have coffee and pie while catching up. She'd tell me about guys she was dating, and I'd share my stories about girls who betrayed my trust. Sometimes we hung out at the student union, studying for finals when we weren't busy with our own lives, just enjoying our friendship. Since Allie lived a bit closer to campus, I would often give her a ride home to her parents' house during holidays and school breaks. Over time, I met her parents, Dave and Marcia Billings, along with her younger brother and sister. I also met some of her friends and relatives before heading back to my hometown during our sophomore year. Things took a turn when Allie came to my apartment crying about her latest boyfriend. He liked larger girls and couldn't keep his eyes or hands to himself around them. He treated Allie poorly and used nasty names linked to her appearance. She was heartbroken when she heard some of the hurtful comments and names. That night, my roommates were out, so Allie and I sat on the couch and drank while talking about ways to get back at her ex-boyfriend. I kept telling her that she was a wonderful person. As we drank more, her focus shifted from revenge plans to asking why I hadn't tried to be more than just friends with her. I was feeling tipsy, so I'm sure my answers made sense then, but maybe not when I woke up the next day. I realized I was giving her short answers. I didn't want to mess up our friendship. We were good friends, just two people hanging out, and I thought she felt safe around me. Then she asked me, "What's wrong with me? Am I so unattractive that you can't imagine being close to me? Do I look so boyish that you might rethink your feelings if you found me appealing?" I felt sure I had reassured her, but you can't always understand how a woman feels about her body, especially when she's been drinking. Suddenly, she was only in her bra. I wasn't sure if I had missed something. It was surprising. I didn't have much experience with women. A few girls had dated me long enough, but I had never been with someone like Allie. I had seen things online, but nothing prepared me for her. I sat there, confused and a bit tipsy, trying to decide what to do next. Allie was catching her breath and soon appeared to be falling asleep. Maybe it was the drinks that made her pass out. I carefully moved Allie to my bedroom and helped her into my bed, covering her up. I took off my shirt and jeans too, even though I usually never slept in just my underwear and socks. I likely passed out, not really falling asleep, because when I came to, I felt small fists hitting me and tiny feet kicking me. Allie was whispering loudly, "What are you doing? Did you hurt me? You jerk." She kept saying other things too, even though her voice was low. It felt like she was yelling at me. I tried to explain that she started it and that we were still dressed, but she was really angry. In the end, I rolled off the bed to get a little space. Her soft hits didn't really hurt, but they were enough to make me annoyed. Finally, I had to shout, "Stop it! Look at yourself! I didn't hurt you. You fell asleep, and I just wanted you to be comfortable. We're both still in our clothes." My loud voice made her stop, and she grabbed her ears. Taking a shaky breath, I stood up and looked for some water and headache medicine. I took some and offered her more when she sat up. She accepted the water and the medicine. After a moment, she patted the bed, signaling that it was okay for me to come back. I climbed back into bed, trying not to touch her, but the bed was too small for that. She let out a big sigh and wrapped her arms around me before quickly falling back asleep. I tried to relax too, but I just couldn't. Soon I could feel her resting against me. After a little while, she relaxed even more and gently let me go. I took off my underwear, finished my shower, and washed my hair. When I was done, Allie was awake, watching me from the bed as I got dressed. I left the room, and she must have gotten up to shower and put on the same clothes she had worn the night before as she got ready to leave the apartment. I couldn't just let her go like that. It was around noon, so I grabbed her hand and took her to Burger King for a light meal. At first, we felt a bit awkward talking, but then we started to laugh at the silly things we had done before. We quickly fell back into being friends, but things felt different now. I began to see her in a new way. Instead of just a good friend, I now saw her as someone I wanted to date and know better. After that, we became exclusive. We didn't waste any time. We started to see each other every evening to study instead of just now and then, and we often had lunch and dinner together. Sometimes we would stop what we were doing to hug and kiss. Actually, we would hug, kiss, and then spend a little longer being close before trying to get back to studying. We began to rent movies to watch together, although we rarely finished one in one sitting. We would start watching a movie while sitting close. One day, Allie led me to the bed, sat on the edge, and began to take off my clothes. That was the first time we fully shared our feelings for each other. It wasn't the last, either. We enjoyed our college days together and got married just after graduation. We both found good jobs at different local companies, but we weren't really competing with each other in any way. Our relationship grew and changed over time. I guess you could say we had a wonderful love life and a lot of good times together. Most couples wait years before having kids, but we were eager to start our family. As first-time homebuyers, we managed to get a home loan with just 5% down instead of the usual 10 to 20%. So we bought our first home in a nice neighborhood, and shortly after, Allie became pregnant with Jason. The pregnancy went well, but Allie needed surgery for the delivery. We spent hours together, gently rubbing her belly, and while she had a few stretch marks, her surgical scar was hard to see. Allie was nervous about how she would nurse with her sensitive body, but when Jason arrived, it seemed to change her. When Jason was over a year old, Allie became pregnant again, and we welcomed a little girl we named Rebecca, but we soon started calling her Becca. Both of us grew in our jobs, and as we earned more, we moved to a nicer and bigger house. Our neighborhood didn't have a gated area, but it was known for being a nice place to live. Many of the people living near us were doctors, lawyers, and accountants. Our city wasn't big enough to have a professional sports team, but if it did, some players would have probably lived nearby. One of our neighbors was a lawyer named Richard, but everyone called him Rick Marshall. He was about 40 years old when we moved in, and he was married to Lindsay. Rick was considered handsome by my wife Allie and had a certain charm about him. He was tall and fit, clearly someone who worked out a lot, especially before he went to court. His wife, Lindsay, was about 5'5" and slim too, but she wasn't very striking. I mean, she wasn't ugly, but she was just kind of ordinary. She wore her hair longer than Allie, who preferred her short hair. Lindsay's hair was still pretty neat, but Allie always liked to keep hers very short. The Marshalls had 2 kids who were both in their late teens and getting ready to go off to college when we arrived in the neighborhood. We met them all at the block parties that happened throughout the year. There was something a little different about the Marshall family because there was another woman, Ronnie Walton, who lived with them. No one was quite sure how she fit in with the family. She wasn't related to them and wasn't a nanny or a maid either. Lindsay worked as a nursing home administrator, and Ronnie was a nurse in the same place. Some people whispered that Ronnie was Rick's girlfriend and that Lindsay had accepted her into their lives. But in public, Lindsay and Ronnie always seemed to be together, and Rick didn't show any signs of affection towards her, making others wonder if maybe Ronnie was actually Lindsay's partner and Rick was okay with that. Nobody really knew the truth, and no one ever asked. The Marshalls had lived in the neighborhood for many years and were generally liked. Some folks said that Lindsay hadn't been a very hands-on mother before Ronnie moved in, often hiring nannies to care for the kids. They even said one of the nannies, a high school girl, went on trips with the Marshalls, and that Lindsay enjoyed taking her shopping, often leaving the kids with Rick. Of course, there were those who thought Ronnie and Lindsay were more than friends, and that Lindsay had somehow led the young nanny astray. But like all the other rumors, no one could say for sure. Still, it made for interesting talk at the otherwise quiet block parties. By this time, our kids were both in school, and our relationship hadn't changed much. I could still make Allie feel excited just by nuzzling her neck. Life went on, and things didn't seem to change much after we turned 30. We worked hard and also made sure to leave work at the office. Our kids were growing up and becoming more independent. They sometimes stayed overnight at friends' houses, and when they weren't home, we made the most of our free time together. Life was good for a while, then things changed. Fast forward a few years. Rick was no longer called that. He went by Richard Marshall now. He was still pleasant to talk to, but he started to pull away from us. He had bigger dreams beyond being a lawyer at his office. He became a public defender and was involved in some big cases that brought him attention. He was starting to make a name for himself. Eventually, his hard work paid off. A judgeship opened up, and the governor chose him for the position. Suddenly, we had to treat him with more respect. He didn't hang out with us like before. There were no more jokes or drinks around him. On the bench, he was tough. His friends, other public defenders, began to resent him. He learned all their tricks and stopped them from helping their clients get free. At the same time, no one could say he favored the side of the prosecution. He was strict about following the law. While things at my home seemed the same, the neighborhood had changed. Now, we are almost at the most recent events. Neither my colleague Ali nor my work changed our tasks, but we hadn't been communicating well in past weeks. Ali seemed a bit distant and was less aware of what was happening at home. I wasn't sure if the kids noticed it or not, but since we hadn't been close during those weeks, I felt the gap more strongly. Talking to men whose wives had been unfaithful, I noticed that honest people who break their marriage vows often react similarly. They struggle to lie because they want to be good and feel guilty. Very few are good at pretending. These honest people often pull away from their families, acting out in anger or breaking down in tears. I worried as Allie seemed to drift away from me and even from the kids. I tried to remember when this might have started. I finally decided it began at our last block party. It was held at the Richardsons' house down the street, and Allie and I were only supposed to bring some drinks. At first, Allie was with me, but then she got caught up in a talk with Lindsay and Ronnie. This was normal, but after the party, Allie felt quieter on our walk home. Each day after that, she became more distant. I began to call her at work randomly, just to show her that I cared and was thinking about her. I would call at different times to keep her on her toes, so she wouldn't know when to expect me. They were usually short calls. Mostly, I'd just ask about when she would be home, what we were having for dinner, or check if the kids got home safely from school. Sometimes she would be a bit curt with me, but most of the time she was friendly and thanked me for calling. One Wednesday, I couldn't get in touch with her. The receptionist said Allie had gone home early because she had a bad headache. I didn't call her again. Instead, I told my boss there was a family emergency and went home. When I arrived, only Ali's car was in the garage. I thought she must really be feeling bad, but as I walked toward the house, I heard surprising noises coming from our bedroom. It didn't sound like she was in pain. Actually, it sounded quite the opposite. As I moved up the stairs, the noise was loud enough that I could have stomped right up. When I reached the landing, I took out my phone and opened the video app before moving closer to the open bedroom door. I peeked around the door and saw Allie with Lindsay. They seemed very caught up in their own world. I kept filming, and then Lindsay said something about whether they should do something before giving her to Richard. I had recorded enough, so I stepped into the bedroom. Ronnie was the first to notice me, and at least she had the decency to blush and move away from my wife. I said, "Lindsay, it's time to stop. Let my wife up." Lindsay looked shocked. She stood up, trying to act sorry, but I wasn't convinced. "So, you were getting my wife ready for your husband?" I asked. She looked surprised, but then nodded slowly. "Are you his matchmaker? Do you go out and charm women for him?" I pressed. "Sometimes, and sometimes it's just for us. But it doesn't last long since he gets bored quickly." Lindsay mentioned the women would be returned okay afterward, and I could tell she was embarrassed by my look of disbelief. At that moment, Allie noticed I was there. She squealed and tried to cover herself. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "That's funny, Allie. We've been married for almost 15 years, and now you're hiding from me when you got caught in bed with 2 women? I decided then that I wouldn't stop Richard's plans. Get dressed, all of you, and leave my house. You have 10 minutes before I call family and friends to tell them what you're doing." I stepped out of the room, trying to keep my cool and avoid doing something I might regret. But I wasn't fully in control. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a glass, and poured some bourbon. I took a big drink and then threw the glass against the counter in frustration. The sound of the glass shattering matched what I felt inside. I picked up another glass and did it again. I poured bourbon into the glass. I drank it quickly. The burn shot down my throat. I slammed the glass against the counter. I poured another glass, then another. That's when I heard a door close. I turned and saw 3 people quickly walking down the street to the house next door. I sat down on the kitchen floor with the bottle of bourbon in my hand. I started to cry. I felt hurt and betrayed by my best friend, my partner, my wife, and the mother of my children. I cried out to God, wishing she had just gone away in an accident or from an illness, not because of this betrayal. I took a swig straight from the bottle. My kids came home right on time. Jason was now 12 and Becca was 10. They were surprised to find me sitting on the kitchen floor with broken glass on the counter. I knew I looked terrible. They didn't know what to do. When they tried to call their mom, they found her phone charging in the kitchen. They finally called their grandparents. Soon after, my mother was trying to make sense of what I was saying. My dad went upstairs and made some guesses that might explain why Allie's car was at home, but she wasn't. I don't drink often, so with all the bourbon and the sadness of finding my wife with other people, I was very drunk. I know I told my kids to leave me alone many times. Then my mom was right in front of me, and I was crying about how Allie had betrayed us, especially me. I'm not sure if my mom understood, but she tried to comfort me. I remember her asking what I did to make Allie upset. I don't think she liked my response when I told her to just leave me alone. I crawled to the living room, found the couch, and pulled the blanket over my head to ignore her. Dad must have come downstairs and shared what he found upstairs. The toys didn't tell him everything, but then a neighbor came over to ask about what was happening since I got home. They must have told my parents about seeing 3 women leave together. Dad finally figured out that the women were not my friends. Hours passed, and the kids were fed and trying to sleep. They were still confused about why their mom wasn't home. I began to feel a bit more clear-headed even if I couldn't sit up. Mom and Dad kept asking me questions, so I finally handed them my phone and told them to look at the pictures. They found a video and watched in shock before quickly shutting it off. Mom started asking, "How do you know Allie wasn't in trouble?" I could hardly believe what I was seeing. "Mom, if this is serious, it started at the last block party. Didn't you hear Lindsay say she saw Allie there?" Then there was Ronnie, who mentioned he was with Allie a few days ago. Ever since that party, Allie has seemed really distant, and I'm worried about her. But she won't talk to me. Do you think she might have been tricked into something? We hear about bad things on the news every day. She didn't seem off or anything, just with those two women. It wasn't like she was complaining. I think she might have been swayed by them, but she didn't seem forced. Since that party, she hasn't shown me any affection either. It's like she feels guilty and can't be close to me while being with someone else. Dad then asked the big question, "What are you going to do?" I slumped and buried my face in my hands. "I don't know, Dad, I really don't. I want her back with us, but not with the cheating. She's still my wife and the mother of my kids, and I love her. But honestly, I'm upset with her right now." I looked him directly in the eyes. She didn't even try to defend herself when this all happened. There were no words from her like, "It's not what it seems," or "Let me explain," or even, "I love you and we can work through this." Nothing at all. After breaking up their close moment, I left the room and went to the kitchen to gather my thoughts. I wasn't drunk before they left the house, but I was feeling a lot. When she left, she didn't say goodbye or anything. I glanced at the big clock on the wall that she had chosen when we decorated years ago. She had been gone for hours without trying to call. Did she even reach out to the kids? Mom shook her head. Then I guess that's it. She's picked them over us. It's her choice now. I assumed she went to the marshal's house, but I wasn't sure. Her phone was still here, and I didn't even know if she took her purse or keys with her. Finally, I helped my worried parents out of the house so they could go home and rest. It was about an hour's drive to my hometown. Since it was around 10 p.m., I decided to call Allie's parents. It was a tough call because they are really good people. I told them that Allie and I were having some problems. I didn't go into details about what I had seen. They didn't need to know everything that happened. It had already been hard when my own parents caught wind of the situation. I informed Allie's parents that she had left the house and that I hadn't heard from her all night. Dave was quick to ask what was happening. He pressed me until I finally said it. I found her with 2 other people in our bedroom this afternoon. She will say I kicked her out, but I just asked them to go. She didn't even try to talk to me or say sorry. She just left with her friends and took nothing with her. Her things, her car, her phone, all of it stayed here. She walked away empty-handed. I have an idea where she might be, but I'm not sure. I wanted you to know this isn't my fault, but she may reach out to you for help. That made him quiet. Well, almost quiet. He stumbled over his words, and I could imagine his face getting red with anger. It must be tough to hear your son-in-law say your daughter isn't being honest. Finally, he calmed down. What about the kids? I don't know, Dave. They are sleeping now, but not very well. They call my parents for help. When they found me sitting on the kitchen floor, I have to admit I didn't handle it well. After I stopped their party, I went to the kitchen and started drinking before she left. I fear I wasn't being a good role model for them. Now I am sober, and I will manage. I might call you to take them sometimes while Allie and I figure this out. Dave agreed and assured me they would help as much as they could. He even said the kids could come over this weekend if that worked. I thanked him and hung up. Now I needed to find a place to sleep. I could not bear the thought of sleeping in the bed where I saw my wife with 2 other women. Just stepping into the bedroom to grab clothes made me feel sick. I quickly left the room and closed the door without changing anything. That would have to wait until I felt better. Thankfully, the couch was large and comfy. It was a bit hard to change positions, but at least I could stretch out. My sleep was restless. In the morning, I found out my sleep was deep enough for someone to sneak back in. Allie's phone was gone and her car was missing from the garage. I looked in her closet later and saw she or someone packed some clothes to take away. I got the kids up for school and we had a quick breakfast. I forced myself to shave and shower in the master bathroom. I rushed through the bedroom, and only on the way back did I realize that a toy was missing, but the bedding was still on the bed. I wondered if Richard was involved now. I shrugged it off, got dressed, and left the room. I took the kids to school, dropping off Jason at middle school and the younger ones at their elementary school. Then I went to work and tried to figure out what to do next. I called a friend for some advice on finding a lawyer. He had just come out of a tough divorce after his wife found out he was having an affair with his secretary. He suggested William Blevins as a good family lawyer. Blevins had been his wife's lawyer, so he knew firsthand how aggressive he could be. During my lunch break, I went to the bank and took out half of my savings and about half of my checking account. I opened new accounts in just my name. While I was at the bank, I spoke to a manager about credit cards. He told me that I would need to pay off the balances to cancel the cards. Even then, my ex-wife might want to keep using them since they were joint accounts. He recommended that I lower the balances and then ask the bank to reduce the credit limit to just above what I owed. He said any reason would work with the credit card companies, but he suggested I tell them I had lost my job. That would lead to the limits being cut right away. Following his advice turned out to be a smart move. A few hours later, I was alerted that my ex-wife had tried to use the cards, but her purchases were denied because the limits were too close to the balances. She didn't reach out to me and didn't even try to call the kids. I could understand why she wouldn't talk to me since she had broken our marriage vows, but not calling the kids felt almost wrong. That Thursday, I called her office to see if she was back at work. Her secretary told me that she had called in sick and then asked why I was calling. I didn't explain, thanked her, and hung up. I thought about changing the locks on the house, but decided that wasn't necessary. A few years ago, I had installed keyless entry locks for the kids, so I just needed to change the codes. If I came home one day and the place was empty, I could use that to take her to court. I met with Mr. Blevins on Friday after another restless night on the couch. I managed to wash the bedding from the bed, but I wasn't ready to sleep in the bedroom yet. When William called me Bill, it felt good. He was clear about how cheating spouses should face consequences. I hadn't decided if I wanted to divorce Ali yet, so we talked about what it really means to end a marriage. I learned that Ali would probably get the house, custody of the kids, and possibly some support money to keep up her lifestyle. I had to laugh at the thought of her being able to keep her lifestyle, but quickly became serious when I thought about how I would live if we did break up. I wouldn't be homeless, but life wouldn't be easy. At 35 years old, I could think about dating again, but I wasn't sure if I wanted that yet. Since Ali hadn't tried to call or reach out to me or the kids, William suggested I report her missing to the police. I could tell them where I thought she might be, and they would check it out and let me know how she was doing. It can help your case if the judge thinks you still care about her. When I told him my guess about her and showed him the video, he seemed to think a lot. At first, we were quite close and friendly, but then Bill became distant and quiet. After a long, awkward silence, I finally asked him what was wrong. He seemed surprised by how the mood had changed. "Oh, I'm sorry, Jill," he said. "When you mentioned Judge Marshall and how he might be involved in your marriage, I started thinking about a cousin of mine. She was the Marshall's nanny when she was around 18 or 19. She went from being a bright, cheerful girl to someone struggling with drugs. Even with help, we could never figure out what caused her change. I always wondered about Richard's wife and if her choices had anything to do with Rachel's issues." He paused and looked at me. "I don't know why I brought this up. It probably doesn't relate to your situation at all and wouldn't affect your marriage or divorce." He waved off his thoughts. I decided to hold off on filing for divorce for now. I went to the local police station and filed a missing persons report. The officer taking the report seemed uninterested until I mentioned where I thought Ali might be. Suddenly, he perked up at the mention of Judge Marshall's name. I wasn't sure if that was good or bad, but he quickly sent a car to check on Ali at the judge's house. He led me to a quiet room and brought me a cup of coffee while we waited for news. After what felt like a long half an hour, a detective entered and introduced himself as Hiram Wilson. I know it's an unusual name, but it's a family name and I've gotten used to it. "Now let's talk about why you're here today," he said. "I understand from the officer that your wife left your house on Wednesday, then returned that night to take some things and her car. Is that right?" I nodded and explained, Wednesday afternoon, I found my wife in bed with two women from the neighborhood. I told her to leave with them. The women were Lindsay Marshall and Ronnie Walton, who lived just a few blocks away. Since she left, she hasn't tried to contact me, which I find hard to understand. What's even stranger is that she hasn't reached out to our kids, and that's totally unlike her. Have you tried to get in touch with her in any way? No, I've left that up to her so far. Can you try to reach her right now? I called her phone, but it went to voicemail right away. Hiram nodded when I mentioned that she wasn't answering. I was worried. A police officer went to the Marshall house to check on her. He talked to a judge who looked up my wife's name. He said that Allie was okay but couldn't come to the door at that moment. There was no reason for the officer to think something was wrong, so he had to leave. The judge knows the law very well and could use it against us. He leaned back in his chair. I don't know what else we can do for you right now. We've been told that your wife is safe and at the Marshall's home, so she's not technically missing. She's just not at home. Did you check if she went to work today? I nodded. Yes, I called in the middle of the morning and she was at work after taking yesterday off. When I asked how she was, her secretary seemed surprised by my question and said Allie looked fine. I suppose we can't take this any further officially. I'm sorry we couldn't talk to your wife directly. In situations like this, the officer usually tells the missing spouse who reported them, so they know to reach out and let everyone know they are okay. Hopefully, she will contact someone soon. With that, the police step out of our lives, and I went home to make dinner for the kids. Both kids had cell phones with a few numbers saved. They could call. They had both Allie's and my numbers, plus their grandparents' numbers. I had them try to call their mother. They did and left voice messages. We all three sent her text messages asking her to reach out to us. I also asked her parents to call and text her. There was no reply over the weekend. The kids were sad most of the time because they loved their mother. I was confused and worried, but I knew Allie was a good mom. I couldn't understand why she wouldn't contact her children. The kids went to their grandparents' house for the weekend, and Dave promised he would keep them busy with chores and fun things to do so they wouldn't think too much about their mother. I was glad our kids were good kids who loved visiting their grandparents. They weren't at that age where they got bored at Grandma and Grandpa's yet. I, however, was feeling bored. I took care of the house and cleaned the bedroom completely. I moved the furniture around to make it feel fresh and different. I know it was the room where I caught my wife in a bad situation, but I found a way to make my mind think it was new. Our home is filled with things that remind me of Allie. Even the garage has her reminders. As I looked at the empty spot where her car usually parked, I couldn't help but think of her. I tried to push away the memories of our life together. I took care of the lawn, and then it was time for a beer, so I had a couple to cool down. Then I did something I had promised myself I wouldn't do. I drove over and parked across the street from the Marshall's house. There wasn't much to see, but I just sat there watching the front of the house. No one came out, and there were no visitors. I stayed there for more than an hour. Since the neighborhood was settled, I couldn't see the backyard without attracting attention from the neighbors. The Marshalls, like others, had a tall fence around their backyard for privacy. I drove to the store and bought some food to cook a simple meal, then returned to sit across the street for another hour. Still, no activity. Finally, I got out of the car and walked up to the door. I felt regret for not doing this sooner. I rang the doorbell and Lindsay answered. I made sure to stand far enough back so she wouldn't think I was trying to barge in. I figured Richard would call the police as soon as he found out I was here. "Good afternoon, Lindsay. You look well." However, she didn't look well at all. Her face turned pale when she saw me. I continued, "I was hoping to talk to Allie. The kids are sad she hasn't reached out to them." She glanced over her shoulder before answering, "I'm sorry, Mr. Myers, but she's busy right now and can't come to the door." Since when did she start calling me Mr. Myers? Lindsay, we've known each other for years. Her color started to return. "Since you asked us to leave your house, Mr. Myers, we don't really know you anymore. Unless you want a ticket for trespassing, please leave my property." She quickly shut the door. I had turned on my phone's video app on the way up because I knew something like this could happen. Just as I walked away, the first police car arrived and 2 officers stepped out. This was unusual for our small town, where usually only 1 officer came per car. One officer had the rank of lieutenant. That might explain why there were two of them. A few more police cars showed up. "Sir, could you come to the car with me?" The first officer wanted me to comply right away. "I'm sorry, officers, what's the issue?" They said, "We received a call about a loud argument at this house. Please put your hands on the car so we can check for weapons." I did as they asked, and they patted me down and took my phone. "Officers, I can assure you there was no fighting here. My wife and I are separated, and she's staying here at someone else's house for a few days. I just wanted to talk to her about our kids, not make a fuss. We will look into your story. For now, I need you to sit in the back of the car, please." Knowing it wouldn't help to argue and that it might cause me trouble, I agreed. The lieutenant went to the door to talk with the judge. I had no clue what the judge told him, but the lieutenant looked unhappy when he came back. They rolled down the window so I could speak. They were polite. "Sir, Judge Marshall says you came to the door and knocked hard until he answered. Then you tried to push past him into the house. Is that true?" I couldn't help but laugh a little. "No, Lieutenant, I didn't do any of that. As I said to the other officer, my wife and I are separated, and she's been staying here for a few days. I just wanted to talk to her about our kids. She doesn't answer her phone or reply to my messages. I wanted to talk face to face about her not contacting the kids. They are very sad and confused about this whole thing." He still didn't look convinced. After all, a judge had given him a different story. "I know you might not believe me, but you have my phone. You can check the calls and messages. I've tried to reach her many times since yesterday. I even called her at work yesterday, but they wouldn't let me talk to her. And I recorded my visit today. I didn't knock hard, and Judge Marshall didn't even answer the door. His wife, Lindsay, did. I didn't argue with her. She just shut the door on me after telling me to leave. I was leaving when you arrived. You should know that he seemed really angry. I don't know who went in to talk with him, but he was upset. He opened my phone to check my simpler of events. When he saw I was telling the truth, his face turned even redder, and he went back up to the house and rang the bell. There was a brief, heated talk, and then the lieutenant came back to the car and shrugged. "Mr. Myers, I'm sorry to say the judge is pressing charges against you for trespassing and making threats. I have to give you a citation because the evidence is clear that you didn't make any threats. I'll give you a ticket now and let you go. Please talk to your lawyer because this will go to the district attorney on Monday. Normally, you would be taken to jail and go through a process before you could go home, but I don't think that's needed right now. But please, don't approach the judge or his family again." I nodded. They quickly wrote up a citation and let me out of the car. I walked across the street and asked a favor. "Could you let Detective Wilson know about this incident?" I reported my wife, Sally Myers, missing yesterday. The police officer was in charge of looking for her. Yesterday, the officer didn't talk to Sally. He only spoke with someone in our house who said she was okay. The lieutenant seemed unsure about this. Something didn't seem right to him. I noticed someone watching us from the front window, so I waved the paper in my hand and went back to my car. I sat there for a while before going home. One police car stayed outside until I left. My mind was racing. What was happening? Why couldn't I talk to my wife? Why was she avoiding our kids? And why was the judge saying false things about me? We never had any problems before this week. Just because I heard Lindsay say they were getting Ali ready for Richard, it didn't mean it was true. We all say things we don't mean in a heated moment. I needed answers. When I got home, I left a message for Bill Blevins about the citation. He called me back a few minutes later. He told me I was wrong to try to see Ali. He laughed about how we might deal with the judge's false claims next week. We decided that if Ali didn't reach out to me by the end of next week, we would file for divorce. We knew we had to find a way to get her to meet with us and to hear what she was thinking. Bill said this in a casual way that didn't sound very serious. After I hung up, I felt restless, so I took a walk around the neighborhood. I didn't look for conversations, but it was early evening and many people were out walking. Everyone who stopped to chat asked about Ali. I told each person honestly that I had caught Ali with two partners and that she had left and was now staying with the Marshalls while we sorted things out. I didn't mention her partners' names. If people wanted to guess, they could. When asked if Ali and I would get back together, I just shrugged and said we needed to work hard and talk openly. By the time I got home, I had spoken to a few neighbors and I knew the news would spread fast. Maybe this would make Ali respond. Sadly, it didn't. I'm not sure if any of the marshals heard the gossip or if they just ignored it and went about their lives. There was still no contact from Allie. On Monday, I told my boss about the citation and that some police might come to talk to me. I also shared that I was having issues with my marriage. He felt for them. He took loyalty very seriously and made sure that all rules about outside activities were followed closely. He often told new workers that he didn't want anyone to go through the pain he and his ex-wife had faced. By the time he finished sharing how hard it was on families, most new employees needed to take the rest of the day off to tell their partners how much they cared. He allowed me plenty of time off when I needed it, within reason, of course, to take care of my issues. He surely hoped I wouldn't land in trouble over this. I knew I would have to work extra hours later to make up for any time I took away. After all, the work world doesn't care about personal problems. Now let me fill you in on Jason and Becca. They came home on Sunday night and jumped out of the car, expecting to see their mom waiting for them. When they saw she wasn't home yet, they looked so sad. Becca started to cry and even hit me when I tried to hug her. I understood she was just upset about not having her mother around. I had tears in my eyes too. Suddenly, Dave got very angry. "Kids, let's go see if your mom will talk to you. Hurry, get in the car." I was shocked, but I thought it couldn't hurt to try. Surely the marshals wouldn't have a problem with Allie's parents or her kids, would they? I told Dave the address, and he quickly backed out of my driveway and sped off toward the marshals. Luckily, the traffic was light at that time of evening. One of my neighbors was outside and looked at me strangely. I walked over and explained that Allie's parents were trying to bring her and the kids together with my support. He nodded and went inside. I knew the neighborhood chatter would pick up again. They were gone for over an hour. When they returned, the kids seemed quiet and looked like they might cry at any moment. Mostly, they appeared shocked and confused. Besides the love of their dad and both sets of grandparents, their world felt turned upside down. Marcia was crying. Dave was really upset. It took a long time to get the kids ready for bed. Becca was worried that she had hit me and feared I would leave her like her mother did. I stayed until she fell asleep before I could leave her room. Jason was a bit better, but clung to me. I told him goodnight and made my way back to the living room where Dave and Marcia were waiting. Dave was having a beer. I knew he would have liked to drink more, but he had to drive home and didn't want to take any risks. Marcia was on her second or third glass of wine. I wasn't sure how much she had while I was with the kids. I started the conversation. "I take it the visit didn't go so well. Did you get to see Ali?" Dave picked up the phone and Marcia started to cry. Did she want to see her kids or not? When I asked her to come to the door, she did, but told me to go away. She stood there, tearful the whole time, and wouldn't come outside or try to reach out to the kids. I moved them closer, but she just kept looking at me and wouldn't interact with them or even say a word. Dave took a long swig from his drink. I didn't know what to think of her. She looked like my daughter, but did not act like her at all. I started to tell her to snap out of it, but then the police arrived, telling us to leave or we could be arrested for trespassing. A lieutenant came over and apologized for having to kick us out. We spent the most time talking to the officers. It felt strange. I nodded, feeling like one of the cops was the same one who had come the night before when I was arrested for trespassing and making threats. I was sorry. I should have stopped Dave from talking to her. It didn't help the kids. "No, we needed to do this now," Dave said. "Marcia and I will testify if necessary about how Allie treats her own children." I didn't understand their plan, and I didn't know these people well, but it felt like they had something in mind. She didn't seem drugged or manipulated. We talked a little longer. I shared my plans for the week, and they looked sad but agreed that something had to change. Dave shook my hand and Marcia hugged me as they left on Monday. Later, Bill Blevins called me around 11 a.m. He had talked to one of the assistant district attorneys who had contacted him. I had sent Bill a video and some screenshots of messages I tried to send to Ali showing there were no replies. The ADA was not going to charge me at this point. She seemed more worried about the false reporting and how messy it could get if it went public. At noon, I went out to get some lunch and stopped at a shipping store, a place where you can drop off mail and packages. They help with the postal service, UPS, and FedEx. This store also had courier services. I had sent a card to Ali at her workplace. They called me at 3 to confirm the card was delivered. At 4, I called Allie at work. As I thought, she didn't answer, so I talked to her secretary, Amy Spelling. Amy said Allie was acting like everything was fine, completely shocked when I told her that Allie was living separately and had no contact with the kids. She honestly didn't believe me and said so. I mentioned the card I had sent, a blank card where I wrote a note asking her to call the kids. Amy told me that Allie looked at the card I sent her, then threw it in the trash without saying anything and closed her door. When I asked her to check on Allie, she came back and said it looked like Allie had been crying. I was surprised when I said I thought that was good. I let her leave. After that, I started doing this every day. I would buy a card and write a note asking Ali to let the kids know she cared about them. I even took a picture of the card and sent it to her at work. I thought if I mailed it to their house, she would just throw it away. After a few days, I would call Amy to see if Allie got the card. She told me that on Tuesday and Wednesday, Allie looked at the card before tossing it out. The others went straight in the trash without being opened. On those days, Ali closed her door and probably cried for a while. Then on Thursday and Friday, she seemed angry and kept her door open. I felt like I had failed. The kids tried hard to behave. They woke up, had breakfast, and I took them to school. They usually walked home around 4 o'clock. They couldn't have friends over when we weren't home, but they could visit friends if they got permission. This whole week, they spent most of their time after school at different friends' houses. In the evenings, we shared the chores. Even Becca tried to help cook. She made a simple meal of hot dogs and baked beans, but it was tasty and filling. They did have a few little arguments, but they were quieter than usual. I worried this wasn't normal for them. Each night, I stayed with Becca until she fell asleep. Instead of taking turns putting the kids to bed, I talked with Jason first, then went to Becca. Some nights I woke up to find one of the kids in bed with me. Either Jason or Becca would wake up, go to the bathroom, and then come and crawl in with me. I think this helped them feel I wasn't leaving them like Allie had. I would cuddle with each of them for a bit before sending them back to bed, just like when they were toddlers in their own beds for the first time. It felt like this had become a normal routine again. We made it through another weekend. I started to see my days as either before Ali and after Ali. She had been gone for a week and a half now. On Monday, I spoke with Bill. We agreed on a general plan for what to do next. I told him about sending the cards to Ali, hoping she would talk to the kids. I said he wished he had a video of how Ali reacted when she heard from her father. The paperwork was prepared at the courthouse, and Ali was served at her job that afternoon. I called Amy to see how things were going since Ali hadn't reached out to me after being served. Amy told me that Ali had seemed to expect the process server's visit. She didn't say much but took the rest of the afternoon off and left. I thanked Amy for being a good friend to both of us and mentioned that I probably wouldn't call again. Bill wanted a meeting in front of a judge. Instead of asking for meetings with lawyers, he thought it would be better to get a judge involved. He didn't think Ali would find a lawyer right away, and he hoped a judge could help us talk. This led to what turned out to be a strange preliminary hearing. Judge Marshall thought he could be fair in our marriage situation. Bill explained that this hearing was supposed to decide temporary child custody, support payments, and where everyone would live. Since Ali had left on her own and hadn't talked to me or the kids, Bill thought it would be easy to ask for support from her. But things didn't go as planned. Judge Marshall stopped Bill from calling Ali to share her side. He said her points were already in the papers submitted before the hearing. He overlooked how Ali had treated me and focused instead on accusations from Mr. Bloodstone. I went to the stand and Bill asked me what had happened. Mr. Bloodstone objected to almost everything I said, even trying to stop Bill from showing a video related to the issue. The judge thought about it and decided the video should stay private. He put a gag order on it, meaning it couldn't be shown to anyone. Bill disagreed, but the judge didn't change his mind. I was then sworn in, and Bill tried to share my side of the story. Bloodstone's objections made it hard to know which questions I could answer. Every time I tried to talk, he would object before I could start. Most of the time, the judge agreed with him, so I couldn't fully explain my side. Eventually, we gave up and I sat back down. In the end, even though Ali didn't want custody of the kids, I had to pay her over $500 a month in child support and another $1,000 a month in support, even though we made about the same amount. I got to keep the house and the kids, but I was told that social services would check in to make sure I was being a good parent. It felt really unfair. Allie didn't say a word during the whole hearing. After Judge Marshall ended the session, I stood up and asked Allie when she was going to talk to me and when she would speak to our children. They cry every night, wondering what they did wrong to make her upset. I admit I was exaggerating a bit, but it's true that in emotional moments, we say things we don't really mean. She never replied. Her lawyer looked at me sternly. I expected that. Bill had told me that Nathan Bloodstone was a skilled divorce lawyer and worked with Judge Marshall's old law firm. I wouldn't be shocked if Judge Marshall still had some money tied up in that firm. The other lawyers would have to help him out when they could. Bill wasn't finished. He quickly asked for a private meeting with a judge. He came back to inform me afterward. I wanted the judge to know I was filing several complaints against him regarding this whole situation. The judge just shrugged. I couldn't figure out why. He seemed indifferent to what might happen. He only said the divorce would be finalized and there was nothing I could do to stop it until there was a hearing about his decisions. I asked Bill if we should pause the divorce. He shrugged again. We could take back our request, but Allie could file for her own. There might be a new judge, but I felt like Judge Marshall was controlling the schedule to ensure he decided the outcome. I planned to stay up late to file my complaints with the Bar Association and the Judicial Review Board. I wanted a quick hearing and a request to keep Marshall from making any decisions about the divorce. We both returned to our jobs. It had been weeks since Allie had strayed from our agreement. Jason and Becca were acting out their feelings. I put them in therapy, hoping it would help, but I wasn't too sure. They needed their mother. Now I would have visits from the folks at Health and Human Services. I could only hope Ali would be honest with them. I knew I would be, and I expected the kids would too. They didn't really know how to lie. Since I now needed to pay support to Allie, I needed a way to do that. I reached out to Nathan Bloodstone to set up the payment. I was surprised that he also didn't want to talk to me. I hung up and called Bill. He was surprised too. None of this made any sense. I felt blocked at every turn, even while trying to meet my court obligations. Allie didn't seem to have a checking or savings account that I knew of. Her paycheck was still going into our shared account. I had opened a new separate account for myself, and my pay was going into it. I was also paying all the bills from that new account. I hadn't touched the shared account since I moved half the money to my new one. I decided that if Bill couldn't help, I would transfer money back into the shared account, but wouldn't use it for myself. I contacted the bank and had my name removed from the joint account so it could not look like I was paying myself. I was losing weight because of the stress. Amy Spelling called me on the day of the hearing. She told me that Ali had come back from the hearing, crying in her office for a long time before finally going home. I noticed at the hearing that Ali looked thinner, even though she had never been very heavy. She was a small person. No one seemed to be doing well, except for the good judge. People often say that justice takes a long time. I guess that is true most of the time. If you are accused of something and trying to defend yourself, this might be good. But if you want to get your life back or find answers to your questions, the slow process is frustrating. Life isn't like on TV where crimes happen and trials start right away. A week later, I was surprised to get a call from Bill. It seemed his filings had made some impact. We would be talking to the Judicial Review Board in a couple of days, and then the Bar Association in another week. The judges only wanted to know how Judge Marshall acted in his courtroom. I thought this might make Ali reach out to me or the kids, but I was wrong. Of course, another lawyer from Judge Marshall's old firm represented him. Bloodstone was a witness and was questioned for a long time about how Marshall clearly had a conflict of interest. The judges were shown a video, along with my video from my visit to the Marshall house. They also looked at the citation for trespassing and threats. The police lieutenant was asked to testify as well. Bill looked pleased when the hearing ended. He thought at the least there would be some penalties for Marshall, since this whole situation was not typical for him. The divorce was put on hold until after the Bar Association hearing. Finally, we learned some reasons for the affair. It seemed Richard Marshall either had enemies at the Bar Association or Bill Blevins had friends there, or maybe both. They clearly wanted to hold him accountable. The association's hearing was intense. The usual rules of evidence didn't really apply in this place. Bill told me before we went in that there's usually an investigation before a hearing, but this one was rushed. Judge Marshall had one of his former partners on his side again. There were questions about any financial ties Richard had with his old firm. Richard's lawyer tried to stop the request for financial details, but was turned down. Richard had to admit he was still getting money from the firm and that he had a say in who became new partners. Allie was called to testify. She admitted to having a romantic relationship with not only Lindsay and Ronnie, but also with Richard. When asked, she shared that Richard had been intimate with her. She also mentioned that Richard liked mixing pleasure with pain. She explained that when the police came to the house while I was there, she had been tied up in a hidden room. Bill inquired about her feelings for me and the kids. Allie told him she loved me and missed the kids deeply, but Richard had threatened to hurt me or take the kids away if she tried to leave or contact us. Tears filled her eyes as she spoke. I love my children and I miss them. He kept my phone from me. I didn't even know if they were trying to reach me, and I couldn't reach them, she continued. He even said that my workplace was being watched, so he would know if I contacted anyone from my old life. The hardest thing was holding back from hugging my kids when my parents brought them to the Marshall's house. When pressed further, she said Richard had claimed he knew many people from his past work who would help him get what he wanted. Richard's lawyer objected several times, but the board told him to be quiet since it wasn't a courtroom. Lindsay Marshall and Ronnie Walton also spoke. They had a very different story than Allie's. They claimed Allie had come to them first, wanting an affair, and said their relationship with her was just friendly. They insisted there was no hidden room in their house. I started to feel angry again. There was no supporting evidence for Allie's claims. It seemed like just a back and forth between her and Richard. Suddenly, an idea struck me. I stepped out of the hearing for a few minutes to make a quick phone call. If this worked out, maybe I could get my life back on track. The hearing went on. The board members continued to ask Richard questions. Finally, they took a break for lunch. I sat with Bill and asked him about the hearing. Each witness had been sworn in and everything was being recorded, both on audio and by a court reporter. I didn't see a video camera, but guessed there might be one. Bill agreed with me. I asked if the testimony could be used in a courtroom. Bill wasn't sure, but thought it could be. Most of the testimony is kept hidden and not shared publicly since the board is made up of lawyers who tend to protect each other. After lunch, we went back to the hearing, which was held in a state office building in the capital, about a 2-hour drive from our small town. Around 2 p.m., the hearing was paused, and the board said they would reach a decision soon. We all stood up and gathered our papers. Allie took the chance to rush over to me and pleaded with me to take her home and keep her safe from Richard. Judge Marshall was trying to convince her to go with him, but someone else walked into the room. It was Hiram Wilson. He must have taken a quick helicopter or plane ride to get there so fast. He went straight to Judge Marshall. Judge, you are under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and whatever else we find when we check your home. As he put handcuffs on the judge, he read him his rights. Then he took the judge out of the room and handed him over to a couple of police officers. Hiram then came back to Bill and me. I introduced him to Allie and Bill. He nodded at them and then turned to me. That was a good tip from you. With Allie's statement, we got a search warrant for the Marshall house. We found an entire secret room and a lot of videos showing how Allie was forced and hurt multiple times. There were even videos of people talking about their plans. We discovered videos of others that the Marshalls had tricked and kept at their home for a long time. It would take months to figure everything out and get the whole story. This explained a lot, but not everything. We will be talking to Lindsay and Ronnie next. I believe they will change what they said when we warned them about lying in court. Lindsay can't be forced to speak against Richard, but Ronnie can and will. I think he paused so we could catch up. The threat against Allie will now be less. When I talk to the judge, I will make it clear that if anything happens to you or your families, he will be the main suspect. He looked over at Allie. We need her to have a medical checkup. It can be done at a hospital so no more evidence is lost. I also recommend she starts getting help as soon as possible. This has been a long struggle for everyone, especially for her. Allie looked relieved. She didn't say much as we walked to the car. Bill and I drove together to the nearest emergency room and checked Allie in. Since she worked full-time, she had her own insurance. I had my own too. After Allie left, I had moved the kids to my plan. We didn't see her for about 2 hours. I was offered the chance to sit with her before and after the medical exam, but I chose not to be alone with someone who had once meant so much to me. I worried I might lose my temper if she said she was sorry or that I needed to forgive her, since she had been hurt and kept against her will. As I sat and thought about everything that had happened, I felt a touch of sadness. Even if Marshall could listen in on Allie's office, there were many chances for her to ask for help and warn us, just like I had sent her a card. She could have sent it with someone or done something. No, the girl I call my friend, who later became my partner, then my wife and the mother of my kids, willingly got caught up in something that changed everything for us. I don't really know what she was promised back then. Maybe I never will. All I know is that Ali chose to turn away from our marriage and our family for something that brought her temporary happiness. She might regret it now, but she did nothing to stop the mess that happened. By going along with what the Marshalls wanted, she helped their plans succeed. Now, she was facing the results of those choices. At last, she was done in the emergency room and was being led to the waiting area. She paused at the desk to share her insurance information before walking over to Bill and me. She kept her eyes down and only looked up when she reached us. They had finished the exams and tests. I had to take antibiotics for a while. I guess Richard passed something to me. I would need to check with our family doctor for more tests. I assumed she meant tests for HIV, since it could take months before that would show up. I nodded and took her to the car we had been waiting in. While we waited, I had made a few more phone calls. I hoped that with the time spent in the ER and the drive home, my request would be taken care of. We didn't talk much on the way home. I had questions for Allie, but since I was driving, I didn't want to hear her answers just yet. I could wait a little longer. Bill had a sense of what I needed from Allie since we had quietly chatted while waiting. He was ready and just needed to get back to town to put things into action. After we dropped Bill off at his office, we headed to the house. My parents were there with the kids, and pizza had just arrived for dinner. As we pulled in, Ali's parents showed up right after us. It was a joyful return home. The kids were all smiles and tearful with joy to see their mom again. They hugged her tightly and bombarded her with questions she didn't fully answer about why she had been gone for so long. Dave looked at his daughter like she was something strange at first, but then he began to relax. Marcia cried with happiness and hugged her tightly whenever she could get past Jason and Becca. She didn't ask any questions. She was just thankful her daughter was safe at home. My parents watched from the side, giving me thoughtful looks. I simply shrugged. There was plenty of time to address everything. It was a good evening overall. The kids had a great time, and I was glad to see the smiles on their faces. I was happy they were enjoying their time with Allie, but I felt a bit unhappy for myself. Later that night, once all the parents left, it was just the three of us at home again. The kids were so sleepy they could hardly keep their eyes open. I could tell they were scared to go to sleep and think it was all just a dream. I suggested to Allie that she put them to bed, starting with Jason. Becca would probably want Allie to stay with her until she fell asleep. I figured they might wake up during the night and try to sneak into our bed. Once the kids were sound asleep, Allie came back to the living room. She had changed into comfy shorts and a fitted top. I found myself wondering what other things might surprise me. Allie came over and tried to sit next to me. I questioned how she thought everything was okay just because she was home. I shook my head and she paused, moving to the chair across from me. I thought she would want to snuggle a bit before bed. It had been a long time since we were close. Didn't she miss me? Of course, I missed my best friend, my partner, my wife, and the mother of my kids. She smiled and said she should be sitting next to me. Then she mentioned she had started some medication. She suggested if I had protection, we could make up for lost time. That sounded tempting, but we needed to talk about plans first. What plans? I just want to be close to you and spend time together. But the first thing is tomorrow. It's a school day. I thought we could let the kids sleep in since it was so late and a big day for them. Do you agree? We could have a late breakfast together at the pancake place. She nodded. Next, I think we need to find you a therapist. And maybe I need one too. The kids are already seeing someone because they've been so upset about you leaving and not reaching out. She tried to look sad, but I spoke up. I told you at the meeting that Richard wouldn't let me contact them. That might be true, but you went to work every day and didn't try to reach us. People can sneak messages out of tough places. You should have found a way to let us know you were thinking of us. I got cards to you without trouble, and there was no pushback from your friends. None of us were in danger. You're smart enough to figure this out. You could have safely sent a message or asked for help." She blushed a little but didn't try to argue. "We also need to find you a new lawyer. Mr. Bloodstone doesn't have your best interests at heart. I've set aside some money for you. Every paycheck is taken care of by the judge, but your lawyer won't return calls about how to handle the money now in your name." She nodded and I continued. "I think you should think about suing the marshals and making everything public." She shook her head. "No, I don't want to face the judgment of others." I couldn't help but laugh. "You really think the whole neighborhood isn't already laughing at us?" I had made sure to share my side of the story when you didn't come home one night and I was taken away for making threats. "I'm sure the rumor mill filled in the gaps I left. The truth will help you fit back into the community more easily." She looked shocked. "You didn't, did you? How could you do this to me, to us? You were found with 2 women who were getting you ready for another man." "I told you to leave that night because I didn't trust myself to keep my hands to myself. You sneaked back in while I slept on the couch and took some of your things. You didn't try to get in touch with us. You turned off your phone and ignored your own children. Even your parents tried to get you to talk to them, but you wouldn't listen." I paused as she began to quietly cry. Despite everything, I struggled to feel sympathy for her. She had destroyed a part of me. I continued, "Yeah, you went to work every day like nothing was wrong. I would call to check on you. Amy would talk to me and insisted I was lying about our separation and your betrayal of us. I believed nothing would change. You would have started a divorce. You would make me pay support even as I took care of the kids on my own. They were so upset that they began to act out. Things got tough until I got them some help from a good therapist. Even then, it was a toss-up whether they could move past your actions or if it would stick with them forever. I just hope having you back home helps them, not makes it worse. We used to talk about everything. Back when we were just friends, we could plan anything. If you had a problem with a boyfriend, I was there for you. But over the last year, you started to keep things from me. You never told me about your feelings for Lindsay and Ronnie. You kept it hidden until I came home early and caught you. Were you hoping I would find out? Was that your plan all along? For me to find you and then everyone would say I caused trouble? Did I mess that up for you?" She looked shocked. "Maybe I was onto something. Was that it? You wanted me to lose my temper and be taken away? You wanted me out of the house while you did whatever you wanted?" She slowly nodded. "You are unbelievable," I said. "I truly wish all of you the worst." I stood up. I had to leave the room or I might end up following her plan. I went to the kitchen, ready to drink a lot, but then I remembered I had thrown all the alcohol away months ago. I realized I didn't want to be a bad role model for Jason and Becca. As I stood there, Allie slowly entered the room. It was a reckless idea, fueled by desire and an old wish. For a long time, I had wanted a close connection with a woman, and here were 2 women who liked me just as I was. They didn't judge my looks, just like you didn't. They accepted my flaws and even complimented my strengths, just like you did. But it felt different and exciting. She paused to see how I would react. The thought of someone like Richard also wanting me was thrilling. Picture simple Allie Myers, admired by a judge. He made me feel special every time we locked eyes. I knew the good judge had been part of this from the start. It was a shame he didn't know what his wife was up to. After I left on that fateful Wednesday, my heart sank when I saw you drinking and breaking glasses right after each drink. I felt I'd messed things up badly, but I was still eager for my first real moment with Richard. But that wasn't how it turned out. He gave me a boy's name and called me that all the time. I was trapped in their place and used all night. By day, I was sent to work. Richard told me how he was going to hurt you and force you away so no one would know how he treated you. So you just gave him up? No, I wanted to come home. I was desperate. You have to believe me. I laughed at her. Sorry, but that's not true. She looked at me oddly. What I mean is, I don't believe you. You planned this. You wanted it. You were willing to have me accused wrongly. You took part in it. The only thing you didn't see coming was that Richard was the worst kind of person. After I was locked up, the kids might have been taken to that house and made to face who knows what kind of terrible things. Did you ever think about that? This stopped her from speaking. Yeah, she hadn't thought that through. I hadn't either, but it made sense now. I'm sure the final decision would have left me homeless, and that jerk would have had access to my kids. The awful scumbag. I had enough of this for one night. It was almost 1 in the morning and I was so tired. I had planned to share the bedroom with my ex-wife, but not tonight. I was sure Bill would help me with an insanity defense. I was done. It was time for bed. I would sleep on the couch again. But I warned her, if she tried to come out of the bedroom before morning, I might end up in jail. But our children would be living with their grandparents if you did this to me tonight. She walked up the stairs to the bedroom, looking downcast. Her return home was not going as she had hoped. She probably thought that because we had been close before, I would eagerly welcome her back. After all, she had had her share of relationships while we were apart, but I had not. When she reached the bedroom, she gasped and then called out, "Where is our bed? What happened?" I followed her up the stairs to see. I wondered if the changes I wanted were done. To my relief, they were. Instead of our large bed, there were now 2 separate twin beds in the room, but they weren't placed together like before. I had arranged them to be as far apart as possible. I hoped Allie would take the bed near the door so the kids could find her easily. She looked at me with surprise. I shrugged. This is a 3-bedroom house. Jason and Becca need their own rooms. I might finish a room in the basement, but I'm not sure yet. It's a surprise that you're home today, so I had to change things quickly. I want to stay here so our kids can have both parents around. I had no plans to share a bed with someone who had tossed away her family for a different life. So for now, we would have separate beds. Her shock was clear. I added, "I'm having Bill create a new agreement. It will let us both find other partners, but with some rules to keep things private. We would go to the kids' events and family gatherings as if we were still a couple. We would work together on the family's finances, plan for the kids' education, vacations, sports, and all of that. We might even look for a bigger house one day, but I liked this neighborhood, so I preferred to stay here." I paused for a moment, feeling the weight of it all. This was all for the kids. I didn't care about her feelings, only about Jason and Becca. Once Becca goes to college, the agreement will end, and we can divorce, and I can move out. I didn't really want to stay in this house filled with memories. It took a lot of strength not to let my anger hurt our children. I wanted to clear out everything that reminded me of her. I was even considering tearing the whole place down and starting fresh just to erase her from my mind. But I stopped myself, knowing it would hurt Jason and Becca deeply. I stood tall, looking her straight in the eyes so she would see I meant every word I said. I think she understood what I meant. Before I lost my cool, I said, "Please go into that bedroom and lock the door." She turned away. "Sweet dreams," was my last sarcastic comment. I went back downstairs. On Monday, I'd find out how much it would cost to turn the family room into a small bedroom for myself. I was sure she would try to get close to me if we shared the same room. My plan was to move a twin bed to the basement and let her get whatever bed she wanted. If she was careful enough, she could even buy a big bed and have her friends over sometimes. I didn't really care anymore, except for how the kids would take it. I didn't even bother to change into my pajamas. I told myself I was too tired, but in truth, I was worried that she would come to me and do something when I was asleep. If that happened, I might react, and I didn't want her to think I was interested in her at all. Her betrayal was still too fresh. Maybe one day, if we could rebuild our friendship first. I quickly fell asleep, even as I tried to think about my future. What would it be like in the next few years? And what about after that? I had no idea. I woke up later. Allie was sitting beside me, softly brushing my cheek. Tears were on her face as she whispered how sorry she was about everything. At first, I felt some sympathy for her, but that changed when I was fully awake. She may have been sorry now, but she was the one who caused all this. She had broken her family and hurt her kids. A tearful apology wouldn't fix things. I sat up and put my head in my hands to keep her from touching me again. I whispered, "Go back to bed. If you keep bothering me, I won't be here in the morning, and then you'll have to explain to the kids why they lost their dad." She cried a little louder and nodded. Slowly, she got up and went back upstairs. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was just past 4 o'clock. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep anymore tonight. I moved to the recliner and turned on the TV. Maybe a boring commercial would help take my mind off things. I woke up again at 8. My body felt stiff and sore from sleeping in the chair. It wasn't the best place for a real rest, that's for sure. I stretched slowly and got up, feeling aches everywhere, matching my mood. I put on a brave face as I joined my children. They were laughing and playing with their mother in the kitchen, having a great time. I reminded myself that their happiness was more important than my own right now. Jason, now 13, was starting to act more grown up. Well, at least some of the time. When he saw me standing there, he stopped. "Dad, Mom asked us to let you rest. Why were you on the recliner, and why are there 2 beds in your room?" I should have known he would notice right away. I just shrugged and said I would explain later. "How about we go to IHOP?" They both quickly said yes, and I told them to get dressed. I called the schools to let them know the kids would be home today for a family issue. Allie joked that she hadn't thought about calling the schools. I could have pointed that out more, but it wouldn't help. I shrugged again and went up to shower and change my clothes. My suit would need to be cleaned after wearing it while sleeping. Luckily, I had a few more suits since I usually dress up for work. I locked the bathroom door and got ready. I prefer to shave first, so I did that, and I also brushed my teeth since they felt fuzzy. I was getting ready to face the day. Then I heard the door handle move a little. I smiled, thinking about how annoyed my wife would be. She would have to wait for me. I turned on the shower and let the warm water relax me for a moment before I started washing. Sometimes I had a rare chance to enjoy a long shower. Normally, I had to rush to get clean and start my day. Just as I thought the water was getting cold, I decided I had enough and stepped out to dry off. I had forgotten to bring clothes into the bathroom. Why would I, when we had a nice bedroom and closet to dress in? I unlocked the door and saw my wife waiting for me on the bed. She wasn't dressed. I had hung my towel on the rack to dry before opening the door, so I was fully uncovered when I stepped out. I wasn't really surprised to see her there. I paused for a moment before heading to the dresser for underwear and socks, then into the closet to put on my clothes while she sat on the bed. I didn't have time to look at anything else. I also made sure not to stare as I walked by her. I quickly slipped on my boxers before she could stand up and catch me off guard. Usually I put on my shirt before my pants, but not this time. I grabbed a pair of jeans and put them on quickly, then sat in the chair to put on my socks. Finally, I put on a nice t-shirt with a funny design on it, almost ready to go. Allie stood in the doorway, still not dressed. "Aren't you going to say anything to me?" she asked. I smiled at her. "Are you coming with us to IHOP, or are you just going to stay here all day without clothes?" she wanted to know. "Doesn't my being undressed give you any ideas?" I thought about her standing there. My partner used to save her love just for me, but that's changed now. Some things just don't stay the same. She looked a bit embarrassed. "You can take your time, but if you want to join us for breakfast, you have 5 minutes. I stepped closer to her and she stepped back, which let me leave the closet. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of coming out of there. It was a silly idea that always made me laugh. Allie turned to get dressed, and I went down to the living room where the kids were waiting eagerly. They were excited to see their mom home again, but Jason still needed some answers. I took those 5 minutes to explain that Allie and I weren't back together. "Jason, I think you're old enough to understand a bit more than Becca. But I don't think you're quite ready for everything, so I'll always answer your questions. When your mom left us, she chose to live with other people. I didn't agree to that, and it hurt our relationship. But it doesn't change our main job, which is to be your parents. Right now, I won't share a bed with your mom while we work on our issues. We are starting over like new friends, but we are still the same people you have always known." Jason nodded, and I could see he understood a little. Becca still looked confused, so I hugged her. "Becca, this just means that even if Mom and Dad don't share a bed or a room, we still love you very much. We will both be here for you until you don't need us anymore. That day is a long way off. By then, you'll be an adult starting your own life with someone special, and your mom and I will be ready to be Grandma and Grandpa." She giggled at the thought of us with white hair and hugged me again. Just then, Allie came down the stairs. I didn't watch her come down, but the kids did. They were amazed to see her back and kept their eyes on her. I worried they would think she would disappear if they looked away. Becca even mentioned that she had to knock on the bedroom door earlier that morning because she was looking for us. She found me easily, but she had been pretty worried about finding Allie. I realized I might have to rethink asking Allie to lock her door at night. We all got ready and headed to the restaurant for a nice meal. Afterward, I took the kids home because they were old enough to stay alone for a little while. Then Allie and I went to see Bill Blevins to go over the new agreement we were considering. Bill gave us each a copy while he kept one for himself. It was straightforward. The divorce process would stop if Allie and I could agree on some basic terms. The outline was not too complicated. We would stay in the house so that Jason and Becca could have both parents living with them. This arrangement would stay until they could make their own choices when they turned 18. I added that Becca must finish high school first. I didn't want her to quit school, even though I didn't require a diploma. Becca's birthday was just before the school year began, and I thought she should focus on her studies during this important last year of high school. I wanted Ali to follow through with her claims against Mr. Marshall. I didn't want him to get away with his wrongdoings. Ali looked at me with surprise. I could tell she was thinking hard, but then she went back to reading and Bill continued. The next part was about dating outside of marriage. Carl asked that you both agree to have an open marriage. This meant that if you dated someone else, it should be kept private. You can date, but there shouldn't be any hurtful comments. No one should overhear anything that makes the other person feel bad. Any guest should come over only when the kids are asleep and leave before they wake up. Is this clear? Allie couldn't help but share her feelings. I will not accept Carl being with someone else while I am here. That idea is out of the question for me. No way. I won't let Carl be with someone else. She shook her head strongly. Bill raised his hand to quiet me down. I don't get your point of view. You were with 2 women and hid that from your husband. Then you went to see them and were with another man many times. You ignored every chance to talk with Carl, your children, or even your parents. You wanted Carl to stay home, take care of the kids, and work hard to pay for everything, including child support, without dating anyone or having any kind of release. Am I right? She nodded, looking unhappy, and closed off. Your husband is letting you keep seeing whoever you want, but is only asking for the same from you. Why is it fair for you to be with others while he is supposed to stay alone? She had no answer. Bill turned to me. Are you thinking about being with someone? I shook my head. He then looked at Allie. Do you plan to reconnect with Lindsay, Ronnie, or Richard? She turned a bit red. I jumped in. I thought so. You are already considering seeing someone from that group? Why do I get the feeling it will be Lindsay and Ronnie that you will hang out with? I'm just supposed to sit at home and wait while you have your fun with your 2 friends and hope to get a bit of your attention whenever you come back. Right. I guess you've never thought of it as cheating if it's with your friends. Again, you're right. She was at a loss for words. Her face showed everything she felt. She felt that it was okay for him to have fun with other people, but not for her. Bill raised his hand again. I don't know if you think this is unfair, but if you don't sign this agreement when it's ready, Carl will move ahead and get a divorce from you. He and I talked about this at length yesterday while we waited outside. I suggest you get a lawyer to protect yourself. He continued with more terms of the agreement. Some included how we would share our living expenses. I agreed to keep paying for the house while Allie would take care of the utilities and insurance. We would handle the costs of our own cars and could replace them whenever we wanted. I wouldn't be taking her with me to look for new cars anymore. She could do the same. The kids would stay on my health insurance. We would each have life insurance to cover any debts, in case something happens to one of us. There would no longer be any joint accounts, like credit cards or bank accounts. We would also have separate phone plans, but the kids' phones would be on my plan. I agreed not to block any of Allie's numbers, including her own and her family's. Allie could choose to block my number if she wanted. I had an issue with that. I asked, what if we're not in touch and something happens to one of the kids? How would I reach you then if you blocked my number? Allie thought for a moment and asked Bill to change the agreement so that she could not block my number for any reason. There was also a part that stated if we get divorced before Becca finishes high school, Allie would have to move out, and I would get primary custody of the kids. She would also need to pay child support and maintenance, but it would all go through a mediator, not a judge. We would also have to get regular health checkups and share the results if needed. I didn't have any issues with that, but Allie wasn't happy again. This time, Bill let me speak. I don't think we'll have a close relationship again, but it's possible. Wouldn't you want to know that I'm being safe if I meet someone new? The same goes for me. I don't see a problem with this. She finally nodded. Bill suggested that there should be a health checkup within 2 weeks of either of us meeting someone new outside of our marriage, or if we start a serious relationship. Every 6 months during our arrangement, we decided that most of our conversations needed to focus on the kids and their activities. The only reason for either of us to miss an event was work. Since neither of us had to travel for our jobs, I thought there wouldn't be any problems. However, I worried that Allie might have other plans and miss the kids' events. She argued against it, but I reminded her that she had missed many important moments over the last few months, including Jason's birthday. I couldn't believe that Richard kept her from calling to wish her son a happy birthday. Allie looked like she might cry as our meeting ended. We made a good start on our agreement. She even agreed to go to therapy. Instead of just a regular therapist, she wanted to see a psychologist or psychiatrist so she could better understand why she cheated and find out if there was a health reason for her behavior lately. After our meeting, we picked up some takeout for us and the kids. After we ate and answered their questions about our appointment, I sat Allie down with a phone book to help her search for good professionals to help her. She needed both the support and guidance. I even agreed she could keep seeing Nathan Bloodstone, but only if he was really helping her. The kids seemed really curious about our meeting, so I sat them down nearby and tried to explain what was happening. I told them, "Kids, being married can be like running a business together. We agreed to have both of you, and when we got married, we agreed on things like how we would work together, how we would act at home and in public, and how we would treat each other. When your mom left, our agreement changed. Now that she is back, we need to make a new agreement. This agreement will help us figure out how we will all live together and be good parents. It will also include rules and consequences if we break them. This new rule is meant to help us always put you first and ensure you don't go through what happened these past months. Mom really regrets not being here with you and promises not to leave again." Allie put down the phone book and came over to hug her children, crying with them for a moment before gaining her composure. "Your dad is right. I made a big mistake and I promise to always be here for you. I don't want to miss any part of your lives. When you go to a birthday party, I want to be there. When you play soccer, I will cheer for you from the sidelines. On your birthdays, I want to celebrate with you. Jason, we need to go buy you a birthday present since I wasn't here for your big day. Christmas is coming, and we will all be together opening gifts, visiting family, and celebrating the birth of Jesus." The rest of the day went by without much happening. Allie reached out to Nathan Bloodstone for help with a legal agreement. However, he said he couldn't represent her in other matters because of a conflict with another case involving Judge Marshall. Nathan mentioned that his law firm was in chaos after the hearings, and many clients were leaving. I couldn't say I was upset about it. Allie also made appointments with our family doctor and found a therapist to talk to. I agreed to see a marriage counselor, too. I didn't plan on sharing a bed with her, but I thought we could figure out together why she was acting the way she was. I realized I may not have been paying enough attention to her, which might have led her to seek comfort elsewhere. I also called an old friend in construction and asked him to give me a quote for a small bedroom in our basement. Thankfully, the project wouldn't take long. I needed a room, and I had to get the permits to start. Allie did not seem happy about this. She tried to get me to spend time with her in the bedroom. I began using the main bathroom instead of the master one for showering and getting ready for work. I only went into the bedroom to grab my clothes and even moved my shaving things to the kids' bathroom. Allie kept asking me to sleep in the bedroom with her. She promised she would leave me alone, but I didn't trust her. I felt she might try to use our past intimacy to get her way while she was free to be with others. Eventually, I gave in and decided to sleep in a bed for the first time in over a week. I grabbed my only pair of pajamas and changed in the bathroom before heading to bed. Allie almost laughed out loud. Normally, I didn't wear anything to bed, only shorts if we had guests. Allie usually wore just underwear, and she had continued that habit after everything that happened. In the middle of the night, I woke up feeling her presence. She was trying to flirt with me, but it was not working well for her. She discovered why when she reached under my pajamas. I was wearing a special device that made it impossible for me to get excited. If I even felt a hint of arousal, it would hurt. There was a lock on the device, and I wasn't about to tell her where the key was. I could tell she was frustrated. "Why are you doing this to yourself? I want you," she said. I replied, "Why are you doing this to me? You pushed me away before." Now, why is it suddenly so important to be close again? Does it make you feel bad about yourself if I don't run to you every time you walk into a room? Am I making you feel less important? Well, now you can understand how I've felt these past months. I sat and thought after I took care of the kids and managed the house all on my own. How did I fail in our love? Why didn't I keep you interested enough that you had to look for someone else? What did I do wrong? Do you want to know what I finally decided? She slowly nodded, wanting to hear more. I decided that it was your choice. I gave you everything. I don't go out at night. I don't get drunk all the time. I haven't been with any other women since the night we first came together. I don't flirt at work. I don't dance with other women. This is all on you. And you haven't said sorry for all the trouble you caused us. You just showed up at the meeting, and everything was supposed to be fine. I was meant to just forgive you and forget everything until the next time you wanted to stray again. You might as well have told Bill that you still plan to be with Lindsay and Ronnie while Sonia agrees. You can do what you want. It's in the deal. She looked surprised and speechless. I wasn't going to let her off easy. You haven't even seen a doctor to check on your health, and you haven't even met with a counselor, and you still think things will be okay between us. Lesson 1. Being together doesn't fix problems. It just meets a desire, and I don't have any desire for you. I got up and went to the basement family room. The couch would have to do for the night. It was not comfortable. I half expected Allie to try something with me again. Finally, I got up around 4 a.m., got my work clothes ready, and checked her phone. There were many messages from Lindsay and Ronnie about how to make things right with me. They thought I could help Richard avoid trouble. I had no clue how they thought this would work unless Allie didn't plan to testify. Whatever. I wasn't changing my mind. Richard had to face the consequences. If Allie or the others lied, it would be their problem when they got caught. I took a shower early so the kids could use the bathroom. I left early so she could wake the kids and get them to school. I had done my share for a long time. Another job that Allie had left for me. Just thinking about it kept my anger boiling throughout the day. I tried to focus on work so that I wouldn't have to think about the mess at home. Life went on, and I thought having Allie back home would make everything better, especially since the kids were smiling again. They were doing well in school and were calmer. The therapist even said they didn't need much more help. After about 10 days, I called Bill to let him know what I found on Allie's phone. He agreed to talk to Hiram Wilson. The court doesn't like secret deals, and what I found seemed wrong. It might even be witness tampering. The district attorney might ask for the phone. I wasn't doing anything wrong by looking at it since it was still on my plan. Bill also mentioned that the final paperwork for our agreement was almost ready. He and Bloodstone had gone over the details a few times. Bill was sure I would be ready to sign it. Bloodstone would urge Allie to sign it since it was fair. Since it was Friday, I sent a text to Allie asking if she would be home Saturday night. When she said yes, I told her that I would be out for the evening. This way, we wouldn't need a babysitter. If she had plans tonight, I would gladly take care of the kids. I didn't have a big plan, maybe a movie and a quiet burger and drink at the pub. She hadn't mentioned needing me to watch the kids that night, but I wasn't shocked when I got home to find out she was going out. I just nodded and reminded her that the paperwork was ready to be signed. I asked if we could meet at Bill's office on Monday. I hoped Bloodstone could join us. Allie nodded and kept getting ready in front of me. We were in the bedroom so the kids couldn't hear us unless we spoke loudly, which I didn't want to do. I kept my tone calm and asked her who she was going out with. She stood up quickly at my question. "I'm going out with Lindsay and Ronnie. This isn't against any agreement," she said firmly. I nodded. "No, it's not. But I have to warn you, they might have a different version of events than you do. They could try to get you to change your side of the story. If you tell a different story later, that could get you into trouble." I told her I believed those could be serious charges. I also warned her that going to the Marshall house might raise questions as well, as the district attorney seemed to have issues with the judge. I let that sink in for a minute. "Maybe you should find a motel for tonight. I doubt Ronnie or Lindsay would want to come here with me around, so a motel might be best." She shot back. "You think I'm planning something with them? You don't trust me at all, do you?" I shook my head. "Look at what happened. You cheated on me without telling me. You even brought them into our home." I accepted this, and it's okay with the agreement we're going to sign. I plan to sign it on Monday. Honestly, If it hadn't been hard for me to get to Bill's office today, I would have signed it already. I know you haven't had a chance to have fun since coming home, so go enjoy yourself. She's trying to get me to join in again. Look, I'm standing here ready. If you just spend some time with me now, I won't go out tonight. The girls can entertain themselves. Please, Cal, just be with me. I turned and walked out of the bedroom without saying a word. A moment later, I heard loud noises and something hard hitting the bedroom wall. A few minutes later, Allie rushed out of the house. I wondered if she had put on her underwear before throwing on a simple t-shirt and jeans. She didn't look like she was going out for a date at all. I smiled to myself. Maybe she didn't need to impress anyone anymore. It made me think, where did the romance go? I spent a quiet evening with the kids. Since I didn't act worried about Allie being gone, they settled down and didn't seem upset that Mom wasn't there. They got to stay up a bit later since it was Friday. Sure enough, Allie came home around 10 and joined us in the living room. I raised an eyebrow at her, but she just shrugged and jumped into our board game. On Saturday, a policeman showed up and gave Allie a warrant for her phone. She wasn't happy. I hoped that meant she hadn't erased any of her messages that I wanted to see. After he left, she went to the bedroom for a little while before coming back. It was getting chilly outside since it was late in the fall, but we all went out to rake leaves for a bit. It kept us warm, and soon the kids started a friendly leaf fight, scattering leaves everywhere again. It was a nice family time. I could tell Allie was worried about me going out that evening. I didn't argue or say anything. I just got ready for my first night out alone since my college days. I wasn't looking forward to it. Not like how I felt in college. Back then, I hoped for true love with every outing. Now I was just looking for some company. I went to see the latest action movie and made a mental note to bring Jason next time because he loves those kinds of films. After the movie, I had dinner by myself, then stopped by a local pub to play some pool while having a beer. While I was there, a girl came over and asked if I was feeling lonely. She noticed the ring on my finger and seemed curious. I thought she might be interested in something else, but I invited her to sit with me. At least I could talk to someone. She was pretty, but seemed a bit worn out. I guess it wasn't surprising, given her job. She called herself Crystal, but I thought that might be a made-up name. We chatted casually while I sipped my beer, and she enjoyed a glass of wine. I shared a bit about why I was out, and she shook her head, saying that Allie was foolish and didn't deserve me. I couldn't help but agree. Here I was, talking to a pretty woman about 5'8", with light brown hair and green eyes. She had a nice figure, too. I wasn't naive. I understood that Crystal was looking for someone to pay her for her company, but I wasn't interested in that. We talked for about an hour, and then she got a phone call and had to leave. That talk was just what I needed. For a moment, it felt like things were in balance again. It boosted my confidence just to sit and talk with a woman without any pressure. I entered the house feeling cheerful. It was after 11 and the kids were probably asleep. Allie was waiting and she jumped right in. "Did you sleep with someone? Are you happy now? Are you going to tell me what happened? Do you want to see me upset?" She started to cry, looking really hurt. I let her have a moment to calm down. Once she stopped sobbing, she just sat there looking sad. I took a seat across from her. "Why is this bothering you so much?" I asked. "You plan to have me arrested on false charges and take everything I have. You even get to have fun with your friends. You kept me from being close to you, not just when you went away, but even before that. What's going on?" She looked so puzzled. "I don't really know. I know I cheated on you, and we agreed we could see other people. But I always thought you would be there when I came home, that we would be together again. I'm having a hard time accepting that you will be with someone else. I know it seems unfair, but that's how I feel. It feels silly of me to expect you to forgive me, but I don't know if I can forgive you for being with another woman." She paused, thinking, "I also want to be close to you. But you say no to me all the time. I'm trying to fix our relationship and be the wife and partner you deserve, but you keep turning me down. I messed up and I hurt you, but I'm working to make things right. And it feels like you keep refusing to give me a chance. If you're trying to make sure we don't stay together, you're doing a good job of it." What she said hit home. She was being unfair. She wanted to keep her freedom while still being angry at me. She wanted me to be patient and accept my part in everything. She didn't want me to have as much fun as she did. She was trying to make things better in her way, but without really facing any real consequences. She still didn't realize how much pain she had caused us. I remember being asked, "Did you spend the night with your friends?" I replied, "No, I didn't." Instead, I got them talking and recorded what they said. "The police took my phone today, and now they have that recording. They admitted they wanted to ruin our marriage and turn me into someone who serves them." Jason and Becca were involved too. I knew I could never trust them again. I hadn't thought about their betrayal until now. Suddenly, I felt very uneasy. My hands felt sweaty, and I felt like I might be sick. Those people were some of the worst I could think of, and I had shared meals with them many times. I lost count of how many. I began to tremble and had to sit down. The past week, I had spent so much time upset with Allie, trying to make her feel as bad as I felt for months. I forgot what really mattered: the safety of my kids. The Marshalls were feeling trapped. They might decide to do something terrible and try to harm my children just to get back at me for standing in their way. After all, Richard was facing serious charges and had lost his job. His law firm was failing, affecting his income too. His license was likely to be limited soon. His wife was having problems at work because her job at a religious nursing home didn't support her choices. With the public attention, only Ronnie seemed to be doing fine at work. I buried my face in my hands. How could I have been so foolish? A cornered animal will fight back against anything that hurts it. I was likely at the top of the list of things hurting them. I kept pushing Allie's buttons, thinking I might win back her affection through jealousy, but that was only driving us further apart and making it easier for our enemies to hurt us, maybe even our kids. Finally, I leaned back in my chair, feeling exhausted as I thought about our future. I knew I had to do something. So I told Allie what I did that evening. I went out to a movie alone. After that, I went to a place called Jesse's for dinner and a couple of beers. While I was sitting there, feeling lost and wondering if this would be my life from now on, just me and the kids, I was approached by a girl who called herself Crystal. It was clear that she wasn't there for a normal reason, but we sat and talked for about an hour until she got a call and left. Then I went home. I didn't find any strange women, and I didn't have any kind of intimate relationship with anyone. I paused and looked Allie in the eyes. "I'm sorry for punishing you right now. We need to call a truce. We must focus on what's best for the kids and keep them safe. We need a plan to protect them. I believe the closer the Marshalls get to losing everything, the more danger they will bring to us. When people feel desperate, they might want to hurt others. The more they need to fight back, the more they will act against anyone they see as a threat. We are the people who have made them feel this way, so we will be their main target." Allie hadn't thought about that. She had entered the situation hoping for excitement and had ended up under the judge's control. She listened to his threats against me and the kids, so she didn't try to get away from him until the hearing. Now she was seeing Lindsay and Ronnie again, thinking they were her friends and not just looking out for themselves. The realization hit her, and she gasped, trying to deny it. "No, they can't be that cruel." She shook her head. "I just can't believe my friends." She paused, reflecting on what she had gone through. "Let's start the truce right now. Let's go to bed, and tomorrow we will plan how to keep us all safe." I didn't promise that I would let her back into my life the way she wanted, but I wouldn't keep reminding her of my plans either. For now, I wouldn't look for other women. She gave me a small smile, accepting this as a step forward. Sadly for her, I still planned to finalize the post-nuptial agreement on Monday for the first time in months. I took her hand and led her to our bedroom. She changed into her pajamas and climbed into bed. I went to the bathroom, put on some comfortable clothes, and returned. I could see Allie felt let down again. Maybe she thought I should feel excited after not being with anyone else, but I wasn't ready to reconnect with her just yet. I turned off the light and climbed into bed, trying to fall asleep. It was hard because I kept thinking about how vulnerable our kids were, and Allie and I too. I didn't own a gun. Allie didn't know how to use one. The kids went to a public school, which we all know can sometimes be unsafe. I wasn't even sure if the elementary or middle school had a safety officer present. I knew the high school did, but that didn't make me feel any better. I was still lost in my thoughts when Allie slowly moved closer and hugged me from behind. Just like our first night so many years ago, I turned to face her, and soon we both fell asleep again. When I woke up in the morning, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to stand up well. Sleeping with someone in a small bed was fine when I was in college, but now that I was in my mid-30s, it was a bit harder. My knees and back felt stiff. I carefully sat up and then went to the bathroom to take off the device I had on. I could have used it without removing it, but I wanted to feel free, especially since it was my choice to wear it in the first place. Taking off the device felt like a big relief. I stood there looking at my wife, feeling grateful for her. I thought about all the happy moments we had together. I remembered our 2 wonderful kids. Then I reflected on the tough months when I had to be a single parent, missing my partner in life and love. I thought about how maybe I should just give in to temptation. Maybe it would ease my pain. But I knew that wouldn't work, because that was what she wanted. She thought that getting back together would solve everything. We needed to focus on our kids. I heard the children out in the hallway. I quickly changed out of my pajamas and got dressed to help them get some breakfast. It looked like it was going to be a quick breakfast day. Allie just lay there and watched as I left the room. I figured she was still trying to get me back. I shrugged and went downstairs. Soon I managed to feed the kids and get everything ready for our Sunday together. I considered going to late church service. We had been going more often since Allie had left us. I guess I was looking for some support for myself, but I also hoped it would help Jason and Becca feel better too. I wasn't sure it worked for them at that time, but I hoped they would be grateful once their mother was back. After church, I talked to the pastor about Allie returning home and how she might join us for church in the future. He was happy to hear that and offered to help. Once home, I shared my plan with Allie to keep the kids safe. I wanted to get a protection order against some people who might be a threat to our children. I also planned to speak with the school officials about safety. Then we would look into getting a shotgun for protection at home, knowing Allie could use it, even if she wasn't trained. I also thought about getting a concealed carry permit to have a pistol for extra protection. Allie wasn't thrilled at the idea of having guns in the house, but understood that we needed to keep ourselves and our kids safe. The thought of our children being in danger was frightening. On Monday, I took the kids to school and spent time talking about their safety with the school principals. Both principals didn't believe my story at first. They soon understood that I blamed them if anything happened to my kids. In fact, they looked a little scared as I stood over them at their desks and explained this clearly. I was surprised that the police weren't at my workplace when I finally got there. I went through the morning meetings and handled a small issue that always seemed to pop up before calling Hiram to talk about getting a firearm. He had listened to a voice message and read the texts on Allie's phone before returning it to her. He agreed that the marshals could be a real danger for us. He told me to make sure Bill got a protection order set up quickly. I planned to call Bill next. My call to Bill was short, and he was already working on the order. After that, I visited a local gun shop to check out some firearms. Wow, there were so many options. Big guns, small guns, rifles, shotguns, and everything in between. I had never hunted or spent much time outdoors, so I felt overwhelmed by all the choices. Finally, I told the salesman what I needed the gun for. He looked around and then showed me a small Kimber 9mm pistol. It could be hidden under a polo shirt or a jacket, but had enough power to stop an intruder. The salesman laughed and said it was what older folks call a belly gun. You could hold it close and know exactly where you were aiming. He warned me that guns with short barrels are not very precise. After checking it out, I decided a shotgun would be better. He advised me to avoid hunting models because their barrels are too long for close use and usually hold only 3 bullets. Instead, he suggested a tactical model. It was pricier, but it had a folding stock and a short barrel. It was legal and easy to handle at home. I agreed to that idea. However, I couldn't take the guns home right away. I had to wait for a mandatory background check to show I was fit to own a gun. I tried to stay alert while going to work and picking up the kids. For the next week, there were no clear threats against us. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from the school. An official told me that my parents had tried to visit the kids. I quickly called my mom, and she said they had been home all day. Dad was working, and they weren't coming down until the weekend, just as I thought. I called the school back and drove straight there. When I arrived, Becca was waiting in the principal's office. She seemed confused, not worried, about being in the office. She hadn't done anything wrong. I gave her a hug to comfort her. A few minutes later, Allie arrived, and we all sat down with the principal to talk about what had happened. I want you both to know that I called the police right away when the couple tried to enter the school. They left quickly, but a staff member got the license plate number of their car. I should start from the beginning, though. Mr. Myers, I'm sorry. When you came in last week to tell us about possible trouble, I didn't believe it at first. I know we have to be careful because of divorces and other things that can harm a family, but I had never seen a real threat from someone outside a family before. So I was hesitant to agree with you. Then today, around noon, a couple came and claimed to be Becca's grandparents. Usually we don't ask for IDs, but since they used Rebecca's full name, and I know you prefer we call her Becca, I became suspicious. I didn't think her grandparents would call her by her full name if you didn't. The couple also looked younger than 40, which worried me too. So I asked them for your phone number to confirm who they were, and they decided to leave. Becca never saw them, and they didn't threaten anyone, so it seemed like no one was hurt. I thanked her and her staff for being careful and praised them for stopping a possible kidnapping. I felt this was a warning that someone was aware of my children's vulnerability. Later that day, after we got home, my phone buzzed with a message from a blocked number. It was brief. "We almost took your daughter today. We won't try the school again. You know what to do." Then the call ended. I called Hiram Wilson, and he sent an officer to check my phone. We didn't have any proof, but his tech team might track the number and find out where it came from in a couple of weeks. I kept a shotgun in the car when taking the kids to school and back. I also had a pistol, but needed to finish a concealed carry class. Everything seemed fine. Then came Becca's birthday. We wanted to plan a big celebration since Allie was back, but we were all worried about safety. In the end, we decided to have her party and hire a private security company to keep everyone safe. Hiram asked to be on the guest list and wanted to inform the neighbors about the security presence. Thankfully, Becca's birthday went smoothly. Her mom was home, and I was there as a supportive dad. Yes, I had a small camera hidden under my shirt at my back. I was also taking self-defense classes at the Y just in case I lost my gun. These classes were helping me get in better shape, at least. Allie and I went to the shooting range once a week to practice with both a shotgun and a pistol. It was almost time for the next hearing for Richard when everything changed. The day before the hearing, Richard and Lindsay's 2 kids told a reporter they were ready to speak against their parents if the Ada wanted them to. The news didn't say much, but it suggested that Richard had hurt his own children before they went to college and wouldn't come back home. The next morning, Richard was found dead in his garage. He was hanging from a beam. Hiram broke the rules by showing Richard's last note that was found with him. The note was messy, but Richard blamed me for his problems. He seemed to know he was going to be found guilty and lose everything. He hoped Lindsay would be okay after all of this. The police said it was a suicide, even though there was no clear way Richard could have tied the rope so high and then fell. There was no chair, ladder, or anything nearby for him to climb. I truly believe someone Richard owed might have thought he was too much of a risk and decided to take care of him. We couldn't know what secrets Richard might have shared that could help reduce his punishment. Even Hiram thought his death was suspicious, but he couldn't go against the DA. Lindsay decided to sell their home and move away. I don't know if Ronnie went with her. I only hoped they would be fine. Suddenly, it felt like there was no more threat to our lives. It felt almost bland. Here I was, ready to protect my family from anyone, and now there were no dangers coming our way. It was hard not to feel paranoid and see danger in every comment or look from friends and strangers. I put away the shotgun and locked the pistol in a safe that only I could open. The kids didn't know about the danger we faced, and both Allie and I were happy nothing changed for them. They could still use social media, play sports, go to school, and hang out with their friends. One morning, a surprising visitor came by. He was a local man known for being a crime leader. I won't say his name. He was actually in my office when I walked in. I was so shocked that I forgot I could have left the office right away since I was just inside the door. "Mr. Myers, you don't know me and I won't bother you again. I want to share how sorry I felt when I heard about the trouble you had with the late Judge Marshall. Some of my colleagues were involved in trying to see your daughter at her school and made a phone call afterwards. I want you to know that they will not contact you again." When I learned the full story about the judge, I stopped all connections with him. Thank you for listening. With that, he walked past me and left the office. I slumped into my chair. This man had a reputation for being disrespectful to everyone. He had just told me that I shouldn't be afraid. My hands shook as I tried to drink some water because my mouth felt dry. A few minutes later, my secretary came in and asked if I was okay since I still looked a bit pale. I think she was surprised when I smiled and assured her that everything was fine. Life at home with Allie and the kids settled into a routine. We finished the bedroom in the basement and I moved a single bed down there. Allie wasn't happy about this, but her doctor helped her see that we still had big problems to work through. Most nights, I slept in the basement bedroom, but I didn't lock the door. The single bed wasn't meant for 2 people. She replaced our old bed in the main bedroom with a king-size one, but I refused to move back in with her. She was still trying to reconnect with me. We went to some marriage counseling sessions, but they didn't help much. The counselor seemed more focused on what I was lacking rather than addressing the bigger issues. She suggested that there must have been something in our relationship that made Allie seek comfort with others. I realized I was partly to blame too. I wasn't giving Allie the chance to understand herself, and I seemed like someone stuck in old ways that didn't match today's world. After about the second meeting with that counselor, I stopped going. I couldn't understand how Allie could handle the different advice from her doctor and the counselor without feeling confused. I went on occasional dates, but I wasn't looking for anything serious. Becca was still in high school, and I thought any woman who wanted to be with me while I was still married to Allie might have issues of her own. I wasn't sure if Allie went out and met others. Occasionally, she would ask me to watch the kids while she went out. When she did, she dressed nicely, but not in a way that caught too much attention. After putting the kids to bed, I would head down to the basement. I never stayed up to check if she brought someone home to the king-size bed. In the mornings, there was no sign that anyone had been there, but that was part of our agreement. I'm sure she wondered if I ever got close to anyone after a date. And yes, sometimes I did meet someone. It was usually okay, but for a guy, any experience is good enough. Since I wasn't after a serious relationship, there weren't many repeat encounters. We went to all kinds of events that involved the kids. We cheered together at Becca's choir and drama shows. We sat together at every one of Jason's football and basketball games, even though he wasn't the star player. Just seeing him in his uniform was enough for us to show up. We clapped, shouted, and celebrated when the moment called for it. Sometimes we even hugged when one of them did something really special that made us proud. Overall, we had a nice life with the kids. We talked about their dreams and plans for the future. We helped them figure out which colleges were right for them. Jason wanted to study robotics and soon left for a university 400 miles away. We started to see him only on holidays and breaks. He even took classes during the summer to finish school a little faster. Now, 2 years later, Becca was about to graduate. She had turned 18 and was ready to start her new journey. She decided to pursue nursing and was even thinking about advanced practices. Her school was closer, just 100 miles away, but we wouldn't see her much either since she'd only come home at the same times as Jason. She was growing up and didn't need us as much anymore. It was time for me to move out. The day Becca left for college felt right. I knew Allie didn't want me to go, but the love we once had was gone, and I didn't see a way to bring it back. We had shared a home as parents and friends, and now that job was done. Besides, I had spent a long time looking and finally found where Lindsay Marshall and Ronnie Walton were living. They still had to face the consequences for what they did to me. I applied for a job near them and got hired. I hadn't told the kids or Allie yet. I think Jason had an idea of what I was planning, at least in general terms about his mother. Maybe that's why he didn't come home often. He was starting to pull away. I hoped we could still have some kind of bond after everything changed. Becca was now a confident young woman. She seemed a little sad around me, but was handling the changes well otherwise. We didn't need to discuss it. She could see how Allie and I acted around each other since the affair. We no longer held hands, kissed, or showed any sort of affection in front of the kids. We were polite and sometimes friendly, but not like we used to be. Becca had been in a few relationships and knew how people acted when they were in love. She often saw her mother looking at me, hoping we would be a couple again, but she had never seen me look at Allie the same way. Finally, the day came for Becca to leave. She packed and repacked her things. She carefully placed every little item from her room into boxes for storage. I could tell she thought she wouldn't come back to this house when she visited her mother again. I didn't think Allie really understood how final Becca's leaving was. Sometimes her smart thinking got in the way of clear understanding. Our agreement was over now. I think Allie believed we would fix our relationship. Just 15 minutes after Becca left, a stranger approached us on the sidewalk in front of the house. He asked us our names, and when Allie told him hers, he handed her some papers and said she had been served. The look on Allie's face was priceless. She stumbled over her words, trying to understand what was happening. I knew I had to explain things to her. When I let you back into this house, we signed an agreement. That agreement was to be there for our kids, and we were. We had an open marriage, meaning we could see other people if we wanted. I never really asked if you were dating because it didn't matter to me anymore. I just wanted to make sure our kids were safe around anyone we dated. Other than that, I didn't care. Now that the kids are getting older, they don't need us like they once did. I'm worried that my inability to forgive you has harmed our relationship with them. I think it will be hard to get them to visit us again. Since our agreement is over, I'm filing for divorce and moving away. I have some things I need to take care of. Just then, a moving van pulled into the driveway. The workers had their instructions and got out of the truck, ready to retrieve the boxes I had packed while Allie was at work. There wasn't much left to take. I'd moved some things earlier, so they were already on their way to my new place. Allie looked confused. I shook my head and got into my car. I rolled up the window and drove away. It would take her some time to understand what was happening. I called her parents, too, asking them to come and be with her while she dealt with this loss. I will admit that I still cared for Allie in some way. She had been my friend, partner, and the mother of my children for many years. It hurt to think about, but that part of our relationship was gone. Now all we had in common were the kids, and they didn't need us like they used to. We would see each other at family gatherings, but I didn't plan to visit Allie's parents at all. They were good people, but Allie really needed their love and maybe their acceptance. Any relationship with me would get in the way of that love. I had rented a small apartment near my new job. I soon made it comfortable, but it didn't feel warm or inviting. I had left that life behind, even though Allie and I were no longer together. Our home had been a real home when the kids were there. I thought I should start building a new life, maybe with a new partner. Still, Lindsay and Ronnie needed to face the consequences for what they had done. Every evening after work, I gathered information about them. I discovered that Lindsay was now the vice president of a small community hospital. Ronnie worked at another hospital nearby as a night nurse while Lindsay worked during the day. I wondered how things were between them, but honestly, I didn't care too much. I just wanted to know if they were still a couple. One afternoon, I decided to follow Lindsay home. She lived in a nice neighborhood in a big house. I guessed she wanted to show off her success. I parked in a quiet spot and waited to see if Ronnie was living there too. About half an hour later, I saw her drive out of the garage and go in the opposite direction. She probably had to be at work by 6 in the evening. I then started digging for more information. There were a few homes for sale in the area, so I called a realtor. I told her a story about needing to find a nice home for when my imaginary wife and kids moved after selling our house in our old town. I didn't share where my made-up family lived. She showed me several houses in that neighborhood, talking about the local schools, parks, and friendly residents. After looking at the homes, I walked around the neighborhood and used the same story when I met people to learn more about the neighbors. I asked them how they felt about living close to others and if there were any drug problems in the area. I added some details to my fake story about how bad the drug issues were in my old town and how it scared me to let my kids play outside. Everyone I spoke to was eager to share their thoughts and gave me gossip about the neighbors. It was a typical middle-class neighborhood. A few people struggled with drinking, and sometimes someone would pull out a small bag of marijuana at adult parties. Some residents were rumored to be dependent on prescription drugs, and a few would use other substances regularly. I didn't ask specifically about Lindsay or Ronnie. The neighbors were happy to share stories about them, but there wasn't much gossip to uncover. Lindsay and Ronnie mostly kept to themselves. They didn't invite people over much and only went to the occasional neighborhood party without Richard leading them. It seemed like they didn't need anyone around for fun anymore. That didn't make me feel any better about what they had done to me and my family years ago. I believed they needed to face some consequences for their actions. A few nights later, I watched their house closely. I didn't see any cameras, but there could still be some hidden. There were no pets to worry about. I thought about doing something to scare them. Maybe a loud noise could work. I just needed to ring the doorbell late one night, and it could all be over quickly. In the end, I came up with a plan that didn't need any weapons. I just had to get inside without being noticed. I looked at the patio door and saw it had a simple lock. One day, I noticed Ronnie sunbathing and looked like he had fallen asleep. I carefully went to the open patio door, taped the lock open, and sneaked away. That night, after Ronnie had gone to work and Lindsay was asleep, I returned. I checked and the door slid open quietly. I removed the tape and entered. I went up the stairs and left a small device on the main floor. I figured out which bedroom Lindsay was in and moved down the dark hallway to wait. I found a light switch at the top of the stairs, which was great for what I wanted to do. I put on an old Halloween mask to hide my face. Then I activated the device, which made sounds of glass breaking and heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The noises repeated over and over until Lindsay turned on her bedroom light. She peeked out and called, "Is anyone there?" I kept the sounds going a few minutes longer until she opened her door and stepped into the hallway, moving toward the light switch. Then I stopped the sounds, leaving the silence filled only with her breathing. "Is anyone there?" she said again as she flipped on the light. I rushed toward her, yelling, "You'll pay for what you did!" She turned to see me in all black with the silly mask and screamed before falling down the stairs. She didn't move when she reached the bottom. I turned off the light and, using a small flashlight, found my sound device on the floor. I checked on Lindsay. She was unconscious and had a big bruise on her head, but her breathing was normal and her pulse was steady. I left her there and quietly exited through the patio door, making sure it was shut tightly behind me. The next day, there was no news about any attack. For about a month, I occasionally checked on their house. Lindsay's car was there every time, and Ronnie kept going to work as usual. When the month ended, some work was done, and a ramp was built from the driveway to the front door. A few days later, I saw Lindsay arriving in a van with a wheelchair. Ronnie was pushing her up the ramp to the house. It looked like Lindsay must have hurt her back when she fell, just as I had hoped. Now, she was facing the consequences of her actions. She couldn't move around well anymore. I wouldn't be surprised if Ronnie didn't stay with her. If he did, they likely wouldn't share the same closeness as before. I really don't think Lindsay would feel much love if she couldn't move well. Now, I can focus on myself. Life moves forward. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.